we'll have meetups in English and French. So please monitor each meetup and you will explicitly see if the meetup will be in English or in French. So we're really happy to have you all here. Thank you for staying with us. And we really believe also that we together we can achieve our objectives as a community. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. So let me present you the organizers. So Jordan, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Jordan from Meritech. I'm a recruiter in Montreal, and I'm in the agile environment because of my work, but also because in this field there are many people who have a passion, and I like to work with people with a passion. So I'm here, and my purpose is to participate to give you the chance to have a good conference in this field. So welcome everybody and enjoy your moment.
Thank you, Jordan. So Malika is part from the organizers as well.
Hello everybody, Malika. I work for Desjardins. I'm project manager. I'm happy to be here to hear Evan.
Thank you, Malika. So we have Stefan as well. I'm not sure if Stefan is present today. I think not. We have Oscar.
Hello, everybody. I am Oscar. I am an Agile practitioner. I have 15 years in Agile. So I decided to, with my colleague, Kalina, Malika, Jordan, and Stefan, we decided to launch this meetup because we love to share our experience and we love to share our difficulty, our challenge in Agile and other domains, coaching.
Thank you, Oscar. And myself, Kalina. So I'm really happy to be here, Agile coach, Scrum Master. I'm passionate about agility. That's everything you need to know about me. So let me present you Evan, who is our presenter for today. So we're so happy to have you, Evan, today. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you, Kalina. I'm looking forward to this. And bonsoir, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm actually quite looking forward to sharing some of the work that we've been doing over the last few years. As Kalina pointed out, I am from Melbourne, Australia, land of fantastic coffee, but terrible weather. It's, what, I think it just turned 7 a.m. or 7:30 now. So, no, 7 a.m. There we go. No, 8 a.m. I don't even know what time it is anymore. It just turned 8 a.m. So we get some warmth, but if my 8-year-old daughter comes in and tries to distract me, I've asked her to give me an hour or an hour and a half. So we'll see.
Evan?
Yes.
May I say a few words for you?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So Evan is the founder and the CEO of Business Agility Institute. That's why the topic today is business agility. He has experience working with senior leadership and board positions, and he very often speaks on topics related to business agility, local international conferences. He's also the author of Directing the Agile Organizations and No Projects, Culture of Continuous Value. So, Evan, that's it from me. You can take it from here.
Thank you, Kalina.
Welcome.
All right. So, yes, Melbourne, great coffee, terrible weather. The other thing to note from a cultural perspective, Australians are relatively relaxed and laid back. Now, obviously that's a stereotype, but in this case, it's definitely true. So please, if you have questions, if you are curious about what we are talking about, my request is that you ask them. I will make sure there is time at the end to ask questions, but I would prefer to ask the questions during. I would prefer, as we are exploring a topic, if there is a greater depth of information that you want, if I touch on something too lightly, right? Please either just mention something in the chat or even just unmute yourself and just go, Evan, just a quick question, right? That is both acceptable and in fact desired, right? There is an Australian saying, which is, I think, very applicable today and both in this meeting and generally around the world. And it's very simple. It's, she'll be right. And she'll be right is that attitude of, like, whatever happens, right, it will be fine, right? C'est la vie, right? And this she'll be right is, and whatever happens is the only thing that can happen, and it will all work out okay in the end, right? So like all presentations, you will get out of this presentation what you put into it. So listen, learn, come with an open mind. I will share some, depending on your experience and background, potentially some controversial concepts. And at the end of it, we will all have a greater understanding of each other. So I'm looking forward to this. If we're all ready, I will very quickly share my screen. No, Kalina, could you please give me permission to share screen?
Yes, just a few minutes.
The joys of Zoom security.
Yes. Oscar, do you have the right to give Evan the presenter mode?
Yes. I do it right now. It's okay now.
Got it. Perfect.
Oh, sorry, Evan.
No need to be sorry at all. Okay, so as Kalina said, I work for the Business Agility Institute. I founded and run the Business Agility Institute. We are a research and community organization. That's the best way of describing us. One of the research studies that we did was very, very early on to try and answer the question, just what is business agility? I used to use a very simple, like, business agility is the capacity for an organization to adapt to an uncertain marketplace, or words to that effect. And the problem with that definition is, while it's not wrong, it is also limiting, and it is also, it does not encompass the scale of a complex adaptive system that is an organization. So we went through and did a grounded research study, looking at engaging with about 60 practitioners, understanding what were the characteristics of business agility. And at the end, and nope, my mouse is on the wrong one. There we go. At the end, there we go. This is what we developed. So some of you may have seen this. This is what we call the domains of business agility. It is a set of characteristics that describe an agile organization. It is not a framework. It does not explain how to be agile or so those specific practices that you can apply. This is the why, who, and what, but not the how. So why, who, and what. And that's important to understand because there is no framework for business agility. Because of the complexity of a business, there can be no framework for business agility, or at least no common framework that applies for everybody. I can create a framework for a process, the software development process or the marketing process, because that is, I can define that process. It is simple, right? It is complicated at best. I can document it, I can define it, I can copy that process from one organization to another and apply it. It's why Scrum works. It's why Kanban works and other frameworks work at a process level. But once we get into a complex adaptive system, that prescriptive approach does not necessarily, it does not easily work because organizations are all fundamentally different and the configuration of all the pieces is unique, right? Statistically unique. So if these are the characteristics, right, I like to think of this model as the do not forget model. If you're going to try and become an agile organization, these are the characteristics that you need to invest in developing. This is the what not to forget. And you need all of them. And I'll be honest, one of the challenges that we see with companies all over the world is that they only focus on one or two of the domains. They're focusing on process agility, or they're focusing on craft excellence, two very vital aspects of an organization, but they don't touch their partners. They don't touch their HR policies on the workforce. They don't touch the skill of management and delegation under people management. So without those complementary capabilities inside an organization, your agile and business agility transformations will reach diminishing returns. And we see that everywhere. Think about the agile journeys and the agile transformations that you have been involved in. And think about those companies that they did agile 6-7 years ago, right? They reached a certain capability and then plateaued. They reached those diminishing returns because their technology software teams were as agile as they could be. There was no more agility that you could add into that system, right? And that they stopped. And of course it goes down, and then 3, 4, 5 years later, they started again, and they reached that point of diminishing returns. So the promise of agile has never truly been achieved in a lot of organizations, because unless you take agility outside the software and technology teams, you are limited. And that's a large part of what we're going to talk about. But let me go into some of these in a little bit of detail. And I'm going to start where all companies should start, and that is the heart of their organization, the center of what is important to them, and that is the customer. Right? Now, there's a great quote by Frederick Laloux in the book Reinventing Organizations. Profit is like the air. We do not live to breathe, but we do need to breathe in order to live. And what is powerful about that quote is it reminds us why we are in business. And this might be a little bit controversial to some, but we are not in business to make money. Making money is a consequence of serving our customers. It is necessary. We need to make a profit. We need to make money in order to continue to serve our customers. But unless you're a hedge fund, really, actually, let me put it a slightly different way. I want you to think about your corporate scorecards, the KPIs that you are held to, right? And unfortunately, in most organizations, the corporate scorecard is financially driven, right? How many widgets did we sell? Have we achieved our numbers for this quarter? And that leads to some of the worst behaviors in organizations, because it leads to those organizations behaving in very that short-term perspective. They're focusing so much on achieving those quarterly targets that they lose sight of the customer. In Australia, we recently had a royal commission into the banking sector. This was about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago. And the Royal Commission found the most horrific abuses of power by pretty much all of the banks. Right? No bank was innocent. Right? Bankers were opening fraudulent bank accounts in the names of elderly customers because they needed to get, they had targets to open a certain number of accounts. Right? There's a great quote by Deming. If you give a man a quantitative target, he will destroy the company in order to make it. Right? Now, that was from the 70s or 80s when he said that. And that is as true today as it was then. And we saw that in the banking sector in Australia, right? That constant drive for financial results, right, led them to forget that they were there to serve the customer. Right? Now, the banks in Australia are sort of learning their lesson, and we'll see if it sticks. So in your organization, right, to be a truly agile organization, you have to be more than just customer centric. You have to be customer obsessed, right? The customer has to be your raison d'etre. It is why you exist.
Evan, I have a question.
Please.
Can we say that very often we are talking about being outcome driven and output driven and not outcome driven?
Yes, but that also comes to the definition of what is an outcome. And when you look at, say, OKRs or KPIs, whatever measurement system you have in your organization, it is vital that you define those outcomes in reference to your customer, right? Not in reference to the money that you make. Money is the indicator, right, of success, or an indicator of success. The customer and the service to the customer is, for the most part, the outcome you are trying to achieve, the benefit that you are trying to achieve. Unfortunately, we sort of focus so much on the I in KPI or the R in OKR that we forget about the rest of it. So moving on, workforce. So I want you to think about the HR policies that you have in your organization. Are they designed to enable an agile organization, or do they work counter to the goals of the agility that you're trying to achieve? And I've personally experienced this over and over again, where we say we will trust you, you are empowered, you can make decisions, but then they give us a 500-page HR policy for travel, right? You look at Netflix and their 5-word policy of act in Netflix's best interest, right? You know what? That's the greatest HR policy ever written. Right? And you look at when I used to work for a very large consultancy, right? My travel policy was get approval from the country manager and buy the cheapest flight, except it would often take like 3 months to get, or 2 to 3 months to get approval. And by then the cheapest flight was 3, 4, 5 times the price it was when I first decided I needed to fly. And what's interesting there was I was never declined. I was obviously trustworthy, right? Because at no point did the country manager or the CFO turn around and say, no, you can't fly, right? So their policy, not only was it anti-agile and showed a lack of trust, it was also counterproductive because it didn't even achieve what they were trying to achieve, which was to reduce costs. Right? Which actually brings us to another key point about business agility, and that's in governance. And I want you to think about a lot of the governance processes that you have in your organizations. Now, I'm a fan of governance. I think governance is a good thing. In fact, my first book was very nearly called Agile Corporate Governance, which my publisher said, I love the book, I hate the title, please rename it. So for me, governance is important. But what's important is agile governance, right? The ability to have a set of controls that enable agility rather than constrain agility. Now, if I can be very simple for a moment, there are really 2 kinds of governance, and I call them approval-based governance and audit-based governance. One of these is more agile than the other. Approval-based governance is stop until I tell you to continue. And you see that in organizations that have gates, right? We have this project portfolio process. You have to go through 3 gates and checkpoints before we even start the project, right? And then once we start, we will have milestones and checkpoints, and you have to go to the project control board, or whatever it's called in your specific organization. And you're constantly accelerating and then stopping, and then accelerating and then stopping again. Whereas an audit-based governance is continue until I tell you to stop. Right? It's not blind, it's not stupid. Right? We know that mistakes happen. We know that fraud happens. Right? So we will check, right? But we're going to trust you to continue until, right, we see something has gone wrong. Now, obviously, we want to check frequently. We don't check once a year. Right? This is not like that big annual audit. Right? This is checking on a regular basis, weekly in many cases. Right? And automatically, we should not be like, the active audit should not be an imposition on the people who are being checked. It should be independent of them. So what we see in these organizations is they just keep moving forward and they keep accelerating, and they can move as quickly and they can adapt as quickly as they need. Now, if a mistake happens, that will be caught, that will be captured. And you know what? That's actually a good thing, because approval-based governance leads to mental laziness. I don't need to think, because I'm just going to like do what I need to get through that gate, and then I just get told what to do. Whereas audit-based governance is, you need to think about what comes next. You need to think about the consequence of your decisions. And it leads to a behavior of ownership. And we'll talk to that in a moment as well. So if mistakes happen, that's a good thing, because mistakes are a learning opportunity. I guarantee you won't make that mistake again. Now, fraud is a different matter. Right? And you know what? Right? It doesn't matter whether you have approval-based governance or audit-based governance. If someone is a bad actor, if someone wants to break the system in a bad way, they'll find a way to do it. Now, the difference is, in audit-based governance, you're actually more likely to find them because you're looking, as opposed to approval-based governance, which you sort of assume they're doing everything right once they pass that gate, right? Whether they do or they do not. So here's a question for the group, and please, if you have any suggestions or any ideas, add it to the chat or unmute yourself and ask. And I want you to think about the governance in your organization, and I want you to share how much of it, right, is approval-based, and how much, if any, is audit-based. So have a think about that and add that to the chat as we sort of move on and keep talking. The next domain, or it's like moving away from why, we're going to look at who. And there are three domains under what we call the relationships domains. All right, so the first one is board. And I'll be honest, we don't have many examples of good board level agility, but it is starting to happen. Companies are recognizing that the top governance of the organization are the furthest removed from their customers. Right? They see their customers through monthly reports that are filtered through 10 layers of the organization. So some organizations are starting to take board members and putting them in front of the customer, whether it's a help desk or in a few retail stores that we're engaging with, literally putting them into retail stores on the checkouts, right? To get them to sort of talk to and listen to some of the problems and the challenges that the customers are facing. So there is movement happening in this space, but not a lot. In our library, and we have a very comprehensive library with hundreds of case studies and references, we do have a couple of references on board. Most recently, there's a not-for-profit, a large not-for-profit in Australia called Choice. It's like Consumer Reports, if you have that in Canada. And they, the chairman of the board, or the chairwoman of the board, came and shared her story about how the board was agile and what they were doing. And so the awareness is starting to happen, but it's slow. The next domain is partners. And this is important to understand, because you need to understand that no organization is an island. You operate within a complex ecosystem of suppliers and distributors and vendors, delivery partners, whatever it is. Right? But these other organizations can be a fundamental constraint to your own agility, right? Where what where it doesn't matter how fast, how adaptive, how responsive you are, if your distributor can't give you customer feedback in a timely fashion, if your suppliers can't keep up, then they are the constraint to agility, not you. Which actually brings us to a very important topic, and that is the concept of the theory of constraints. And I think a lot of you may be familiar with this, but for those who aren't, the theory of constraints comes out of Lean, a book called The Goal by Eli Goldratt. And it's very simple. It says that in any process, there is a constraining factor, right? And let's say you're building cars on a production line, and installing the engine is the constraining factor, the slowest part. It doesn't matter how much transformational energy you put on any other part of that system, right? You can only build cars as quickly as you can install engines, right? So with apologies to Eli Goldratt, I talk about Evan's theory of agile constraints. An organization can only be as agile as its least agile division. And if we take a software context, and obviously this doesn't just have to be software, it makes sense that agile, capital A, agile, Scrum, Kanban, or not so much Kanban, that came later, Scrum or XP emerged in software, because at the time, in the early 90s, late 90s, software products took years, 3 to 4 years to come to market, right? They had this overblown engineering process that was, well, basically the constraint to agility. So Agile emerged as a way of resolving those constraints. Now, in my experience, I started using Agile back in 2003. And so 2003, 2004, 2005, we're creating products using Agile. We have 2-week sprints. We're deploying every 2 weeks, but we're not deploying to production. We're deploying to staging, because operations was a separate division. And we had to wait for a release window, a minor release every 3 months if we were lucky, or a major release every 6 months if we weren't. So our agility was fundamentally constrained by the ops team, which is why obviously globally it was logical for DevOps to emerge, because DevOps was the response to resolve that constraint, right? So now we have a very powerful engine, right? We can create change every two weeks. We can deploy change every 11 seconds, right? That's Amazon's statistic, right? So where is the constraint in or outside your organization, right? And that's the question you have to ask yourself. And in many ways it's different. It might be HR. Does it take you 3 to 4 months to hire the right person? It could be finance. Does it take 18 months to get a budget change approved? Is it marketing? Are they selling the wrong product, right? Or overselling or over-promising? Is it compliance? If you're in a regulated industry, is your compliance function limiting your ability to adapt, right? So there's 1,000 different places where that constraint might be in your organization. And again, a question for you is, where in your organization is the constraint? And I want you to have a think about that. And if you have any thoughts or questions, please ask, or obviously add them into the chat. Theory of constraints is a very powerful metaphor. It does help you understand the implications of diminishing returns and the consequence of that. So keep that in mind very much as you work inside your organization. Next, people management. So now we're in the what domains. These are the practical characteristics. People management is a skill, and it is a skill that is often not taught. I recently wrote an article that was published in HBR France. And no, I don't speak French. HBR translated it for me. I know enough French to order a coffee. Un café, por favor. But people management is a vital skill, right? And it's one that is often overlooked. In my own experience, when I first got promoted to being an executive, I wasn't a good executive. I was a good team leader. I was a good project manager, right? but I wasn't good at running a $35 million program division. I didn't know how to coordinate across multiple business units. These were skills, and in my defense, I was never taught, right? I was promoted because I was good at my job, not because I was a good manager or a good executive. So this limitation in how we train and promote managers it hurts us as organizations. We hurt ourselves by doing this. Now, I had a good manager who sort of slapped me on the wrist and it's like, Evan, like, get your head out of your ass and, sorry, Australian, pull your head out and actually like stop being so arrogant and get better, right? And he gave me some advice and mentorship, and it might have taken me a while to be open to receiving that feedback, but when I was, I learned. I did get better. At least I think I did. But many managers, like, they don't know what it means to be a good manager. They don't know what it means to be able to delegate. They don't know what it means to be able to develop the people under them to be the best versions of themselves. They don't know what it means to develop strategy, to build coordination across multiple businesses. These are skills that need to be taught, and sadly often are not. The next domain is the sense of one team or common purpose. You might have 1,000 employees. You might have multiple business units and divisions, but unless they're all pointed in the same direction, working towards a common purpose with a sense of unity, and no amount of agility is going to help, because you'll be very quickly and very iteratively pulling in different directions, right? So you need that alignment, and that's a skill of leaders to instill that sense of vision and purpose. The next domain is called strategic agility. And that is, to be honest, probably quite obvious right now. Right? COVID-19, yeah, Peter's principle. That's exactly it. Back to people management. On strategic agility, as I said, I was in New York when when the pandemic was declared. We have our global conference in New York every year, and yeah, that was a difficult time to be running a conference in New York City. But what was interesting is I had a front row seat to see how companies were responding, right? And I could see with fair certainty those organizations that had business agility and those organizations that did not, entirely based on their strategic strategic approach. And those organizations that had agility, right, were making decisions every single day, right, because the world was changing every single day. But every decision was coherent. It was strategically aligned. These were organizations that had practiced for years how to make decisions, how to make strategic decisions, right? And change strategy based on insufficient information, based on a changing marketplace. Now, no one was prepared for the scale of COVID, right? But they knew how to respond. Whereas those organizations that didn't have agility, now they still made decisions every single day. But every time they would jump from decision to decision, it was disconnected, chaotic. And so where those decisions were being made, that company without agility ends up like jumping off a cliff, right? Because their decisions just do not align. So strategic agility right now is such a vital skill, and we are seeing it in some, and the organizations who are responding well to COVID-19 are the ones who are demonstrating true strategic agility. Now, to be fair, no amount of agility is going to help an airline or a restaurant right now. So the market is stronger than their agility, and unfortunately, there's probably not much they can do about that. But for the rest of the business population, strategic agility is vital. So moving away from the, oh, sorry, yep. No, strategic agility is not business agility. It is one of the facets of business agility. You need strategic agility to have business agility, but at the same point, you need sort of an agile workforce, or you need strong people management to have business agility. These are all capabilities, characteristics of an organization, which are intertwined. Right now in COVID-19, strategic agility is probably one of the most important characteristics, but it is not the totality of it. Moving on to the individual domains. So these are the domains of agility that happen up here in each of you as people. Now I'll go through this relatively quickly because I think we get most of this. Growth mindset has become a buzzword in the last few years. I see it being taught to my daughter in grade 2. So the idea of a growth mindset has the concepts of psychological safety and facing adversity and growing through adversity, seeing it as a chance to grow versus a limitation of yourself. These are all concepts which I think are fairly well understood now, so I won't go in too much into detail, again, except to say that it is vitally important. The next one is ownership and accountability. Now, this is a double-edged sword. You can't have ownership without being held to account. So ownership think of ownership as the other side of delegation. As a leader, I can delegate an outcome to my teams, but they have to have the skills to take ownership of what is delegated to them. And like delegation is a skill that can be taught, ownership is a skill that can be taught. But interestingly, it also means that if you don't prepare the teams in your organization to give them the skill to take ownership and the resilience to take ownership, then you actually can't. Delegation only works if people can be delegated to. It's empowerment only works if people can be empowered. And that's a personal choice that they have to make. And again, you can teach them the skills to take ownership, but it's up to them to actually then take ownership. But the other side of that sword is accountability. So if I own something, but I'm not held to account for what I own, that is irresponsible. Right? But if I'm held to account for something, but I don't have ownership of it, that is useless. That person will probably leave your organization very quickly, to be honest. So you need both in equal portions in an individual to be effective. Moving on quickly, the next domain is craft excellence. Now, craft excellence, this is about the skills that people have in their job. Right? It doesn't matter whether you're a software developer, a designer, a marketer, an accountant. If you don't have a decent proficiency in your chosen craft, in your chosen career and job, no amount of agility is going to help. And I have unfortunately seen organizations who have begun agile transformations because they're producing poor quality products. And it's too expensive to train like 5,000 software developers. So they'd rather hire 6 agile coaches and hope that suddenly allows them to create better quality products. But the constraint to agility isn't like agile. The constraint to their agility was how good they were at actually delivering their product in the first place. So craft excellence is a vital aspect to this. Yeah, and sadly overlooked, very, very much overlooked. So moving on to the last 3 domains. These are the operations domains. And I hope people are thinking of questions so that we don't have 20 minutes of awkward silence when I finish. The first of these domains is structural agility. Now, structural agility has been popularized by a lot of the big consulting firms. Right? They'll come in and they'll restructure your organization around squads and tribes, or cells and circles, whatever their preferred nomenclature is. And suddenly you're agile. And the problem is you're not. Right? partly because structural agility can't exist independently of everything else. And just restructuring the organization won't give you good people management. It won't give you unity and common purpose. However, structural agility is still important, right? So I want you to think, there's a couple of concepts here which are important. The first is the idea of flow. Every time the flow of value crosses a structural boundary, you introduce handoffs and delays. And that has a absolutely critical impact on the customer experience. And there's a really good example coming out of DBS Bank in Singapore, where they started a transformation of the lost credit card process. Now, they did this, they were agile, they focused in on the customer experience. They changed the help desk and the help desk scripts to make it more human, and they leaned it out, value stream mapping, all that kind of stuff. So they figured out how to improve the credit card process, and they got it down from like 4 days down to the next day. Fantastic. Except then they did something they'd never done before, and they called the customer. And they said, hi, madam, you've just been through our new lost credit card process. How was the experience? Right? And to which her response was, it was great, but where's my debit card? Because she hadn't lost a credit card, she'd lost a wallet, right? But because of the structure of that organization, right, that sense of crossing that boundary, right, it meant that the customer view of value was different to the organizational view of value. Right? Now, this, and DBS is one of my, is a fantastic organization when it comes to business agility. They're probably one of the more advanced banks in the world. They're not perfect, nobody is, right? But definitely, they're definitely one of the best. So think about the handoffs in your organization. Your customer doesn't care about your structures. It doesn't care about your silos. So if your silos interfere with the flow of value to the customer, that's the wrong structure. Now, the other point to make about structure is the concept of tensions. Now, tensions are a very important, it's a very important concept, because there is no right structure. The systems in your organizations are based on the balancing of multiple, how do I put this? They're based on balancing multiple competing, contradictory concepts, right? Performance, organizational performance, and organizational health, right? Centralization and decentralization, right? Spawning new businesses and shedding new businesses, right? These are tensions that need to be balanced in your structure. And those balances are also context specific. So the way your structure is balanced today, the balancing between these tensions, these polarities, is different to how it should be in 12 months' time. Right? So a large part of structural agility is to actually create a structure that can change the balance of these tensions without having to go through massive organizational restructures. Right? So to find new ways of existing, but to be able to change to those forms very quickly. And in fact, in some cases, even organically. Techniques like self-selecting teams come into this, which allow people to move around between teams based on demand. So understanding tensions, and there's a great, we have a great paper in the library on this by Jardina London. So it's definitely a topic that if you don't understand the types of polarities and tensions that exist, do check out that paper and have a read. One final point about structural agility. I don't have a slide about this. This is something different. a lot of times people say they want to break down the silos. And one of the problems is you can't, right? You can break down silos, but silos will always form, right? In the back of our head here is this monkey brain, right, which forms tribes, small communities, 150 people, 50 people, and it depends on which number you want to pull, right? But those tribes, that us versus them, is sadly human nature. Now, the art of structural agility is to let silos form that are constructive to customer value versus destructive to customer value. Back in the day when you had a dev team and a test team, right, those silos are destructive to customer value, right, because it has to pass across those. So dev and test were always fighting with each other. It's like, it's not my problem. It's over with the test people. They're taking so long. And the testers is like, well, if you didn't write such bad code that took us so long to test, we would be done by now. So by bringing those teams together, we broke those. We broke that tribal boundary. Now other tribal boundaries emerged, right, between products, right, or between tech team and business teams. So it's always going to occur. The trick is to design it in a way that is positive. Last two, very quickly. Process agility. Now, process agility is the easiest and the most common form of agility. It's where most organizations start. This is the realm of agile with a capital A. Right? Scrum is a process. It is an agile process for the software development lifecycle. Right? Same as XP. Right? You've got agile marketing for marketing processes. You've got beyond budgeting, or at least some of beyond budgeting, because beyond budgeting is quite broad, which covers some of the accounting processes and the budgeting processes, the finance processes. So adopting a practice, a framework to improve a process, fantastic. But here's the truth. Your organization is not one process. Your organization is a complex, tangled web of processes and systems and tools and concepts. And all those interactions together it's the enterprise operations, which is where enterprise agility comes into play. It is, you don't just need agility in the process, you need agility in the system. You need agile in the system. So think about where you exist in the organization. Let's pretend for a moment that you're part of a software function, a tech function. All right? What are the supporting processes around you? You've got security, you've got portfolio management, you've got HR and recruitment, you've got the project management processes, you've got different tools and technologies to enable this, Jira and ... So all of these come together and create a flow of value through the organization. And if you're using Scrum, then again, calling back to theory of constraints, if you remember, I brought that up at the beginning, right? If you're using Scrum, then congratulations, you've touched on the smallest part of agility that you need. You need to take that into the rest of those input functions and output functions, so that you're actually able to express that agility in any sustainable or serious way. So I want to pause there. I want to pause there and give people a chance to ask questions or comment. What is your experience inside your organization? Where are the constraints inside your organization? And if you think you're doing business agility pretty well, I'd like to hear your thoughts and hear what you're doing well and why. So allow me to open up to the floor. Who'd like to be the brave first person to ask a question? I can sing. You don't want me to sing. I can sing that.
I can ask a question.
Go for it.
Okay, so I'm curious, Evan. You mentioned at the beginning that this is a model that can help us as a guideline. So let's say if we want to start a business transformation, agile transformation. So how can we use that model as a guideline? Where do we start? And generally, how do we use it?
So I'm going to give you two answers to that. So the first answer is the more general one, right? Which is use this as to help you identify those characteristics that you are weakest in. Right? So inside your, and you don't need a consultant to come in and tell you, right? You probably know already, right? If you're having a real problem with like quality, it's probably craft excellence. If you're having a problem with people not knowing what to do, or or doing the wrong work, you probably have a problem with people management, or maybe one team. All right. So look at the challenges and the common challenges you're facing, right? And then look at this model as what have we not focused on, right? What is lacking in our organization? And then you can make strategic and tactical decisions to address that, right? If, for example, the challenges you're facing is in terms of a partner, if it's a supplier, then maybe it's time to go through and find and select a new supplier. If it's your distributors, maybe you need to send a couple of agile coaches to your distributors to teach them how to be agile, right? And interestingly, it's sometimes investing in someone else's company is actually the best thing that you can do for yours, right? If it's around strategy, if you're producing products that aren't being used, and in my personal experience, this has been one of the biggest frustrations in my life. I come from a technical background. I was a software developer, then I was a project manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if I look back I would say that more than 50%, actually probably more than 75% of the products that I was involved in either building as a developer or managing, right, do not exist anymore, right? Not because they reached an end of life and sort of grew, but because they were never used, right? They were bad ideas, but we spent years building them because we thought that's what people wanted. I'll be careful what I say because this is being recorded. There was one point I worked for the Australian government, and we spent tens of millions of dollars on a whole of government data sharing platform. Right? And the whole idea, it was a noble idea, was to get government departments to use data to make policy decisions so that we could make better decisions. Right? And it was a noble cause. It made sense. But by the time I left, and I was there for like 3 years, by the time I left, we had less than 20 users. So think about that in terms of ROI. We could have given each one of them $1 million to put to their products, to what they were working on, and that would have been a better use of government money, right? But because we didn't have strategic agility, we had agile, right? Absolutely, I was being agile, right? But we didn't have strategic agility. So we never had feedback, and we didn't have customer centricity, right? We never got feedback from the customer. We never listened to them about what they needed and how they were going to use it. Right? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that was the case. But if we'd had that strategic agility, then we would have wasted 6 months, not 3 years. Right? So you use this to help you identify those areas that you need to focus on. Now, let me give you another more broader answer, because there's one concept that's not in the domains. It's sort of incorporated inside a couple of them. And that's the concept of measures, right? And I spoke about that when we spoke about customers, OKRs and KPIs and that kind of thing. And I'll be honest, one of the first things I recommend organizations do is change their organizational KPIs, or at least whatever level of the organization they're at, change how they measure success. And there's a quote, you get the behavior that you measure. And if you want to instill sort of an agile mindset, measuring people on a contrary mindset, which is what most KPIs are, isn't a good place to start. You can't be agile if you're going to be measured on time, cost, and scope. So change your measures, change your KPIs, and as one of the very first things that you do.
Evan,
like for example, yes?
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, Evan, first, congratulations for your very understandable English as an Australian. Usually,
we all grew up watching the BBC. Australia and Canada, we are a lot more alike.
So when we speak about agile, we see Scrum Master, we see the sprint methodology, so it's very understandable. Now, when you talk about people management or board or strategic agility, now how do you implement this type of behavior of methodology in where people are working very differently? So what does that mean, agility for a board, for example?
So that's a very good question. And let me tell you the first mistake I made. So Kalina, when she introduced me, said I'd written 2 books, right? Directing the Agile Organization and No Projects. I do not recommend you read Directing the Agile Organization, right? Because I wrote that 10, 11 years ago now. And it is based on sort of who I was at that time. And I'll be honest, it was not about business agility. It was about agile business. And that was a mistake, right? And so one of the problems I see in organizations, and they go through the same learning that I did, right? So I can't criticize them because we all start somewhere. But this idea that I can take Scrum or Kanban or SAFe or LESS or DA or XP or whatever, and I can apply that to the board or to finance or to HR, and I can teach the board how to use Kanban. I can teach HR how to use Scrum. I can introduce maybe not pair programming, but pair work into operations, right? And don't get me wrong, there are things that divisions can learn from Agile, right? And there are some practices that translate into other divisions, right? That is fair. But going to the board or going to people managers and teaching them Agile is the wrong approach, right? What is important is to engage them where they are and how they work. So a good example is sales. I've been working very closely with a lady from Russia called Marina Alex, and she's been developing sort of an agile framework for sales. And it's very good, right? But it was developed not as a way of teaching sales teams Scrum, but it was developed from sales first. Right? What does agility in sales really mean, right? Because a user story in sales doesn't make sense. So by starting from sales and their need for agility, right, then building out an approach, a way of working for them, right? And the same is true of the board, and the same is true, Sway, as Alexandra points out. You start from where they are and respect what they have done to get to where they are, right? Just because we have this concept of beyond budgeting or adaptive finance or lean accounting, and there's multiple approaches in the finance space, doesn't mean that suddenly the way the accountants have been doing it for the last 30 years is wrong. All right. Now, it's to be fair, most accounting standards have been in the same way since the 1920s, when the budgets were first invented by, of all people, McKinsey invented the budget. But respecting the experience is a huge step in making this actually work and sustainable. So it's not agile business, it is business.
Do you mean, Evan, that actually the work for this type of board, people management, accounting, etc., would come from a brainstorming to see where what we are doing is cumbersome, what we have to get rid of? Is it what you see as an improvement for this type of?
Mm-hmm. So in Lean, there is a concept called walk the shop floor, right? And it really comes down from, it's a concept to get the managers out of their offices, from the ivory tower. And if you're going to design a process, you can't do it in a boardroom. You have to walk the shop floor if you're going to improve a process. And the same is true here in terms of business agility. You can't design an agile organization in a boardroom. It has to be done in the organization, by the organization. Gemba, yes. In the organization, by the organization. And it is very personal, and in many ways, there's a huge amount of variability that emerges in a good way, because different functions operate in different ways. So you got to get out of the office. So it's not about brainstorming, though that is a part of it, right? But start from where the organization is. Tools like value stream mapping, or like a value stream network, as opposed to a value stream map, which is like a more extended, because a business is a complex adaptive system, not a single process flow, right? But getting out there and actually understanding where the problems are right now, right? Much better. I wouldn't do brainstorming in an office.
Evan, it's Karen Chambers. I have a question. What level of the organization contacts you for help?
So I'm not a consultant anymore, so none.
Okay.
But back when I was, we would come in one of two ways. Right? The first would be from the executive. Right? Sometimes the C-suite, sometimes C-1. Depends on the context of the organization and the size of the organization. But unfortunately, when we're contacted by the C-suite, it's often because things have gone wrong or they've gone badly. Right? And I don't want to say it's too late, right? Because it's never too late to start. Right? But it would have been good if they contacted us before things had gone off the rails. But the other place we would have come in is actually via the technology function. And that goes to that theory of constraints. Right? The software function was doing agile really well, right? But they were constrained by somewhere else in the organization. Now, they didn't know that. So they'd invite us in. How can we do agile better? We're not getting the results that we want. We've got all these coaches. And we come in and it's like, it's because your coaches are in the wrong place. You need to go send your coaches to the HR team, or go send your coaches over to marketing or to finance. Right? Because that's where they can add the most benefit to the organization. So yeah, so it depends on the organizational context.
Okay, thank you.
Oscar, you had a question in the chat.
Yes, Evan, my experience is in many enterprises, many companies fail the transformation just because of cultural depth. It means so much politics, working silo, people don't get along. So how to link the mindset, the corporate culture with the model? This is my first question. And my second question is,
you go.
According to you, with the good KPI to implement with the business agility model?
So I'm not going to answer the second question at all. because the KPIs and the measures are very, very customer specific, right? I've seen organizations implement failure KPIs where they reward people for experimenting and trying and failing, but it's your KPIs and your measures are fundamentally unique. Now, in terms of mindset and culture, it's actually not in this model very deliberately, because your culture is the interplay of every element in this model. The culture is the color behind it. It's how it all interacts. You can't change culture directly. You change culture by changing something and hoping that will have a positive impact on your culture. You change a bit of people management, you start inculcating and promoting growth mindsets, you improve processes, your HR policies. And each of these sort of helps to change the culture of the organization. So culture isn't a thing, it's not something that you can touch or change, it's why it's not on the model. Culture is the connections between everything on that model. Right? And in terms of, if we look at mindset as a distinct concept from culture, right, then it really does come down to how you, what you value in that organization. And that value comes through in KPIs, that value comes through in the role modeling of the managers, so how they behave. And that value comes through in sort of what you invest in. And by showing like what is important, what is valued, right, that will influence and start to change mindsets. Unfortunately, what we see in organizations is they say they value agility, but what they do is everything but. Their actual actions is to value time, cost, scope. They value making money over customer centricity, and the word, and unfortunately our mindsets are driven less by what someone says and more about what we see and perceive. So mindset, unfortunately, is what was my grandfather used to say? Do as I say, not as I do, right? And that's not the right attitude.
There's another question, Karina, from Amri Heffen. Amri, could you unmute your? I'd like to.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for the session and yeah, for the thoughtful insights. I would like to touch a little bit more on structural agility, and when you mentioned about constructive and destructive silos. Yep. So if you can touch a little bit more on this.
So give me a little bit of context. Is there something that you're struggling with right now that we can talk through?
In general, like with the mindset of many companies going through the agile journey. So everyone is like talking big time about agile, but when it comes to actions, it's harder. So yeah, that's why I want, like, if you share some cues, like because when you mentioned like constructive silos, so what's considered as constructive silos? Like usually silos is has a negative connotation. So yeah, it was interesting to hear that from you, and the idea that it's not about resisting them or breaking them, but kind of like reshaping them maybe.
To be fair, if you have destructive, negative silos, yes, you have to break them, right? But you recognize that other silos will form in their place, and if you don't design how the silos will form, they will still form, but without your control, which may not form in the way that you want. So I'll give you an example. There, in our library, we have a case study from a startup in India. It's about 150 people. And in this organization, they decided that they wanted to structure themselves around the customer experience. Because what was happening is you had your standard structure. You had your back-end team, your back office teams. You had in the tech space, you had your Android team, your iOS team, your web team, your infrastructure team, and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of antagonism between the teams because they kept they kept sort of fighting with each other, both over resources, but also over, it's like Android would be like ahead of iOS, or the back-end team wouldn't have put something in place that was needed. So there was a lot of tension between them and almost hostility between them. And it leads to sort of blame, and it leads to basically saying it's not my responsibility. Right? It's over with the back-end team. I can't do anything until they finish their work. And so that kind of abdication of responsibility is a problem. So when they structure themselves around experiences, there was, for example, the onboarding experience, which was a team responsible, accountable for the first 24 hours of a customer's experience, or a user's experience. And in that team was iOS and Android and backends and web and customer experience people, ethnographic researchers, all that kind of stuff. And you still have these silos, these structures, right? You have the customer experience team and you have the payments team, right? But the payments team and the customer experience team, while there will still be tension between the two, right, because that they may have some dependencies on each other, those dependencies are greatly lessened, right? They are, they don't get in each other's ways, right? In architecture, like systems architecture, we'll say like loosely coupled, tightly aligned. And the same is true of an organization structure. Right? So if we have silos that are like tightly coupled, right, like that can and often will end up having a negative consequence. But if we have loosely coupled but aligned structures, silos inside the organization, then those teams can operate as independently as possible. It'll never be completely independent. That's just, you just can't do it in any organization above about 50 people. But it will give you a lot more, it'll give those teams a lot more ownership, end-to-end ownership of an outcome, to go to Kaleem's point very early on. And if they own that outcome and they have a lot more control over that, then you have a positive relationship between a lot of the silos. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for the example as well.
There's another question from Sylvie Lodic. Could you unmute your? Are you here, Sylvie?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can
Here we
see
go.
Sylvie. Yeah.
Sorry, I was clicking, but I wasn't unmuting. Thanks for giving me the time, the opportunity to ask my question. Evan, quick question, and to be honest with you, guilty of not knowing too much the open capital market in Australia, obviously Canada, US, and UK a little bit more. But my question would go along the lines of, because if it was me, I would defer it, but I want to hear from you. Would you defer your approach or your proposed roadmap towards business agility if the company is on closed versus open capital market? Because of the scrutiny of the analysts and the investors and, you know, the quarterly results and so on and so forth?
So no. Open capital, publicly listed companies, there is in many ways a greater need for agility.
I agree.
There are certain changes that are necessary in so much as you don't have as much freedom in terms of your fiduciary reporting responsibilities. Correct. Certain things have to be done in a particular way, right? But this is a situation where constraints are opportunities. if the regulator, or like in our case, ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, if the corporate regulator forces you to do something, right, then you have to do it, right? But that constraint gives you the ability to do everything else around it. Right? And we see organizations creating sort of, so interesting, sorry, I'll give you one example. There's a company, unfortunately I'm under NDA and I can't say who it is, but we worked with their finance team, and it was a tech company, and we implemented a sort of a people API. It's actually what we called it, a people API. So finance had to report, right, like taxes once a year. They had the annual reports to the shareholders, and like the external interface operated on an annual cadence. We could not change that. But what the organization and what we did was understand that just because the outside world needs a specific cadence doesn't mean the inside world has to follow that exact same cadence. And they wanted to go towards beyond budgeting. They wanted to go to rolling budgets. And so what we ended up creating was like what we call this people API, where the interface into finance, right, was agile, it like rolling budgets, monthly, and so forth. But finance was responsible for sort of translating and tracking that to the outside world. Right? So that's sort of almost this like black box obfuscation, where they could be agile inside but still report those annual results. Now there are some other issues around things like transparency. So you can't be as transparent if you're a publicly listed company. Obviously, like your insider trading laws and all that kind of stuff. So there are some things that have to be a little bit more concerned. But another organization, another publicly listed organization, when they went to IPO, right, they literally went to their staff and they said, okay, for shareholders or potential shareholders, there are these additional restrictions about what you can do, when you can buy, the insider list, right? So if I'm the CEO of an organization, I can hold shares in that organization, but there are things I can and can't do and times I can and can't buy those shares, right? So they literally went to the organization and said, you have a choice, right? You can either, right, be read into that list, right, and have those restrictions placed upon you, but then keep that sort of that open, transparent communication, or we can reduce the transparency for you so that you're not seeing that potentially insider information so that you can trade freely. And 100% of the organization said, read us in, right? We want transparency, we want that openness more than we want that freedom on the market. Right? It was a very, very interesting case. Now, obviously, that's one example. Right? One anecdote is not data, but it is somewhat telling in terms of how open and closed markets do operate.
Okay, thank you.
So, Evan, it's already 7:26. So I think we're very close to end the meetup. All questions have been asked. We only have one question left from Oscar. So
yeah. So I'll just cut you off. No, we actually don't run training. We are a research organization. We are a community organization. We have chapters. We're actually about to launch a chapter in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we have chapters in Peru. We publish research, and fundamentally, we are a membership organization. So I would encourage all of you to become a member and sort of get as much value as you can out of the material that we produce. But I'm afraid we don't run certification and we don't run training. If you're looking for certification in business agility, then IC Agile has some very, very good certifications, and we've helped develop some of those. If you're a coach, an agile coach, then both IC Agile and Scrum Alliance have advanced coaching certifications that operate at the enterprise level versus at the team level, the CEC in Scrum Alliance and the ICP CAT, Coaching Agile Transformations, operate at that level. And I would recommend those. If you're in the safe space, then like safe is safe and you can't break out of the safe space, so stick with the safe certifications. But those would be the certifications and the training I would generally recommend. Again, if you do have any questions around business agility, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, ask me your questions. We are a community organization, so my job is to help you do your job better.
Thank you so much, Evan. I can see that you know, a lot of people found this interesting. We managed to keep most of the people until the end, and we had so many questions. So thank you so much for being here. I just want to take 2 minutes to introduce the next meetup. So the next meetup will be on September 10th. The topic is Total Brain Coaching, a holistic system for effective habit change. So it's really interesting. It's about a book and a method invented by 2 people. One of them is neuroscience, and the other one is agile coach, Dr. Robert Kate Wallace and Ted Wallace. So they will help us. They will help us basically improve the efficiency of the team, the efficiency of the companies that we work in. And it's really, really interesting to see how we can use neuroscience to change habits, to change mindset, to change culture, to influence leadership and everyone in the organization. So I really invite you to register for the next meetup. And we all hope that you had a lot of fun with Evan. He's so good as a speaker. So again, thank you so much, Evan.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here, and I hope you found it helpful. And please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Evan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, Evan.
Bye. Have a nice day, evening, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Evan. It's a sacrifice. You're in Australia. We are here in Canada.
It's a small world right now.
Yeah, really.
Everyone is connected.
That's it. I think that went well. So thank you.
It's a win because many persons asked questions. They show interest on subject. So it's, you know, I ordered your book, No Project.
That one's good. My first book is there's still some good stuff in it. Don't get me wrong, but it is definitely a book of its time.
Right.
At some point, I really need to
release
it. So, sorry, Oscar?
I'm so excited to read about that because, you know, we have in a strong waterfall culture. So when you talk no project, it's like shocking.
That's it. That is so.
Yeah.
Evan, can you share with us the presentation? Maybe we can upload that in the meetup.
I will do so very shortly. Yeah. So in terms of yeah, no, I'll just email you the slides.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'll remove all the animations. I'll just put a PDF so that it's just the main slides. Otherwise, it looks very strange with the animations. So I'll remove all those.
PDF is fine.
Yeah.
Yes, PDF is fine. Thank you.
So did that go as you wanted? Was there any other topics that you wanted? That is there any other information you want me to share, like maybe via email that you were hoping I'd cover that you could send out to people after the fact?
So mostly we have the recording. So Oscar, maybe you can stop the recording now because we're still recording.